If you've ever said, I know exactly who I want to work with, it's just they can't afford it, or I don't know anybody like that, or it seems really hard to find them, then stay tuned because in this episode, I'm going to show you exactly what I had to learn as a premium coach to get lots of clients. My name is Amanda Kaufman, and welcome to the Amanda Kaufman Show. I am delighted to share with you today's conversation about how do you nail your niche, even if you kind of hate that word. And hey, when I was starting out, I was a rebel without a cause, oppositional in every way, because I just didn't trust what people were saying about what I needed to do to be successful as a coach. And so my mission in this conversation is to maybe approach this from an angle that you haven't heard before so that you can decide who do you want to work with, who wants to work with you, and feel really good about the direction that you're going with your business. So if you've ever felt kind of paralyzed about who you want to choose to work with, I completely understand that because that's how I started out too. When I was trying to do it, I felt like I was always looking for this magical person, this person that unfortunately didn't really exist. And I felt like I was either just talking to nobody, or worse, I would be out there, going out there into the world, talking to people online that just really didn't get it. So today I fast forward, we've overcome this challenge, but today I run a multi-six-figure coaching business. I sell coaching courses, I have a membership, and I've been able to make a living for not only myself, but my entire family by packaging my expertise and selling it without having to work for another company to do it, which I'm incredibly proud of. And I know what I had to go through to be able to make that happen. And so here's the thing that you need to know is it didn't start with a giant following. I still arguably don't have a very large following per se on social media, yet I've been in business for 8 years. And so I didn't start with a giant following. I had no idea what a funnel even was. I thought it was something you used in your kitchen. And I really started my business with having real conversations and real proximity to real people who really wanted my coaching. So what we're going to do in today's episode is we're going to figure out how do you exactly identify that niche that isn't imaginary, it's not exhausting, and it actually gets you paid and that you're qualified to serve as well. This is not about just simply niching down. You've probably heard like the riches are in the niches. This is about focusing in a smart way so that you're more likely to get the results that you're really after. Now, when it comes to your niching and specializing, I see two big issues that most coaches encounter. And, I've been working with coaches for about 6 years now on their marketing, their sales, their packaging, their confidence, all of those things. And there's two major issues that I see when it comes to them appropriately setting up a niche that actually makes their business easier instead of harder. The first is what I call the unicorn avatar. So it's where they've built this amazing avatar, this amazing idea of who they want to coach, but they're living in their imagination. They're your dream client, but they're nowhere to be found. So it's this beautiful, elusive, imaginary creature. And the thing is you don't see them when you're at networking events. They're not following you. They're not connected to you on social media. And so what do? You end up staying in this marketing mode, not talking to anybody. And sometimes this can even look like a tremendous amount of content, like creating all these content, putting the quotes out there, sharing your life lessons and all this kind of thing. And just doesn't feel like it's actually getting grippy. It's not actually going anywhere. It's like trying to catch a unicorn. The other side of that is the overexposed, anti-avatar, and that is when you're surrounded by all these faces, family, friends, coworkers, but they don't actually value coaching. And, I would say that coaching gets a pretty bad rap. So does generally mental health. So does so many things. So if you're trying to speak to the nameless faces masses, you typically find that they can't afford what you have, or worse, they just don't believe that they need help. And so now it just kind of feels like the problem is you. And that's not it, right? It's actually a proximity mismatch. So, either extreme here ends up in like a paralysis, ends up in not feeling like you can be effective with your marketing. And there's this magical middle of the ideal avatar. And the ideal avatar is going to be more special than the nameless, faceless masses, but it's going to give you a little bit of breathing room if you have identified a unicorn avatar or like such a rare person that it's incredibly difficult to find them. We want to identify a market of people that you can help. And my favorite way to do this is, instead of finding like this perfect client, you need a problem of appropriate magnitude that you can solve for people who have that problem frequently. So the ideal avatar is going to, when you're creating content, you've nailed it. When they go, that's definitely me. When they're like, I care about this topic, you're getting the message that they care about it. And I believe I can make progress. So the problem of appropriate magnitude, do they know that they actually have the problem that you solve? Is it big enough that they would pay for the help with it right now? And does it solving it help them shift something about their identity, their income, their energy, or their relationships? The key here is to speak in such a way that they're saying like, that's definitely me. And you're honoring that they are special, that they are unique. I care about this topic. A lot of coaches will hear from their friends or their colleague coaches, that's a great idea. And they care. The person who's giving you the feedback is like, I care about you. I care about you, the person. So I'm going to tell you that it's a good idea. I'm going to tell you that you should definitely pursue that, go you. And they're being a cheerleader. But the thing is they don't personally see the problem. They don't personally see the challenge. So it's super, super important that you set it up that way. And I believe I can make progress. I think sometimes with a lot of coaching content and marketing and so on, it can be a bit, I was going to say dystopian, but just very plainly overly negative. It's like you're down in the dumps and everything is horrible and it's always hard and it's really bad. That kind of content doesn't really motivate anybody. It facilitates that shutdown and that retreat. So I think it's really important that we measure that. So when I first started, I was actually talking mainly to corporate moms who were really stressed, but they weren't really looking for coaching. And they liked me personally, but when it came to pinning them down to have a conversation, they just weren't buying. And I had to shift from that avatar, from that problem of appropriate magnitude, and change the question. Like, who do I want? Instead of saying like, who do I want to help, right? And trying to rescue corporate mothers, I changed it to who already wants help and I am near them. And that's one of the reasons why I built the Coaches Plaza. I was surrounded by all these coaches who believed in coaching, who wanted help in a coaching container. They were already really sold on it. And I know there's a lot of negativity in my space about coaches coaching coaches who coach coaches who coach coaches. I had to work through a lot of that, because the thing is when you're succeeding at something that other people are not succeeding at, the first thing they want to do is just throw shade. And so coaches do believe in coaching. So, starting there, but more specifically, there was a problem that coaches had that I could actually solve. And that's where I found the legitimacy of doing it. It's not a pyramid scheme. Most of my clients, just for the record, out of hundreds and hundreds of clients, almost none of them are business coaches, right? Almost none of them are teaching sales. Almost none of them are teaching marketing. Most of them are relationship coaches, leadership coaches, health coaches. They're helping, normies, real people out in the world with real challenges using the things that they learn in my programs, right? And I want the same thing for you. If you have high proximity to, a particular professional group or a particular community, and they all have this problem that you're really good at solving, don't worry about other people's judgments. Other people's judgments, that is like there's a lot of bitter critters running around. You know what I'm saying? So like, just don't even. As I got better, my niche even evolved. So like I said, I at first didn't realize that I probably wouldn't be working with a lot of marketers. I probably wouldn't be working with a lot of sales coaches. I learned over time that I help coaches who specifically want to sell to consumers, right? I help coaches who are typically certified. I help coaches who are typically at a phase and stage of life that they can afford to invest in the coaching business, but they are not desperate to get the client. They're not desperate to make the money necessarily. Everybody wants to make more money. And so don't get me wrong there. But what I realized as I got to know my actual niche better is that I had some assumptions that I couldn't have dispelled or gotten rid of without actually getting experience. So, I didn't necessarily find my exact perfect niche. What I did is I activated the proximity to the communities that I was a part of. And I asked myself, what problems are people that I'm close to facing that I can uniquely solve? And that's how I did it. That's how I got going. And by the way, when I look at my most successful clients, those are the things that they typically are doing that make a huge difference. Now, when it comes to your messaging and you picking a niche, I would say that the most underrated and very likely to lead to success strategy is starting with people you already know. I know what it's like to be fearful of the judgment that you might get from friends and family. And look, you don't even have to sell to your friends and family. But if you keep it a big secret what your super genius zone is, then how are they supposed to connect you with anybody that maybe they know and you don't know? And how are you supposed to grow an audience at all, right? So I would start with people that you know so that you're not inventing problems and you're not inventing things that people are working towards and working on. And like I said, instead of selling directly to friends and family, maybe you're just making them aware of what you do and asking for introductions to people you don't know, but just start with the people you do know. The second thing I'd say is make sure that you are solving like solvable but painful problems. Like go for the difficult stuff. If there's something that I see a lot of coaches struggle with is they do the nice stuff. It's nice to be more organized. It's nice to have good leadership skills. It's nice to get along well in your family. And it's just nice and it's soft and it's squishy. And the thing is that when people are investing in coaching, usually they're experiencing a good amount of pain. They're frustrated that they haven't already achieved the goal over the long term. They're frustrated because they've probably tried a million other things, and now they're feeling like they're feeling like the coach is almost the last resort because the coach is expensive, the coach requires time, the coach requires focus. It just so happens that coaching tends to be the most powerful and fastest path to transformation for personal transformation that there is. But people, kind of almost have to burn a lot of bridges before they finally cross the one that actually works. And that's just the nature of it. So don't shy away from solving painful problems. Don't shy away from them just because they're difficult. Just meet them where they're at and be a helpful human, man. Okay, so the next thing is make sure you're using their language in your content. So I found myself even in this podcast just correcting myself when I would want to choose a $15 word to say something when I could just say it very straightforward and very simply, right? So try to use really plain English and don't get too fancy because you're going to lose people along the way. So really, really important, especially if you've got a lot of coachy language and coachy jargon. The other thing that I want you to really think about is think about the problems and the challenges that your niche are facing as opposed to simply the demographics. So for example, in my business, I would say that my private clients over the last 8 years, 75% of the time men, right? However, in the group programs, it flips. It's 75% women in my group programs. And, at first that really kind of surprised me, but then I realized I was like, oh, there might be some differences in the sense of permission that people have to invest at higher levels. There might be some differences in the desire to have privacy versus the desire to learn in community. There may be some differences in preferences here. So the thing that's always been the same though is I help coaches love their business. So it doesn't matter whether you're a man or a woman, I still help you with the same thing. And, I say 75%, that doesn't mean that there's not a significant population that is, the opposite gender. So pretty cool. In terms of the don'ts, I would say don't wait until the perfect person seeks you out and shows up. There's no such thing as perfect. There's just great. And in fact, in my own system, I have a rating system behind the scenes where I just rate the fit for a coaching relationship. So it goes from bad fit to okay to good to great, right? There's no perfect on this scale. So if you just give yourself permission to work with people who are okay, good, and great, over time, your marketing will refine and your communication will refine and your branding will refine. And you will find that where you land is very different than what you assumed 10 years before, Don't bother posting the generic content. There's just so much stuff out there, and taking the time to really think about what is the problem that my person's facing and how can I solve it? And what are the excuses they're going to make, the obstacles they're going to encounter? How would I help them through those things? Get specific about the problems and the challenges. If you keep it all at this really high level, I call it the head in the clouds content. If it's just really high level, it's just talking about the emotions. There's no tactics, there's no strategy, there's no logic. Then you're going to find that people just scroll on by because it just looks like what everybody else is doing. So make sure that you are being thoughtful about the content, and it doesn't have to be complicated, but let's make sure that it is something that's very resonant for your perfect person. One of the biggest issues that I see in my, yesteryear kind of content, so as I was coming up, I had to learn this, but also this is just such a common thing when I look at 80% of coaching content out there. And that is just relying on your audience to decode what you mean. I used to get so frustrated that people didn't already recognize my genius. They didn't already recognize the value of coaching. They didn't already recognize their own personal power. They didn't already recognize the sequence of steps that they should take. They didn't already recognize the habits that have trapped them. And they also didn't already recognize, what they needed to do. And as a young consultant, this actually really, really frustrated me because I just saw again and again, we would implement these big, fancy, expensive projects with these big, fancy, expensive corporations and governments. And they always really struggled with implementing the thing that we were teaching them to do. And it was the instructions are right there, the process steps are right there. You've got the expert in the house to help you, and you are virtually ignoring it. What the heck is going on? And what I realized was that change is actually so hard. It is really hard to observe yourself. It's really hard to imagine a future that is really different than your past or your present. It's really difficult to be concerned about how other people actually feel about it. It's challenging to realize that, even really wealthy people, they know their resources are somehow limited, either because they don't have the resources. So that's one thing, or it might be that they have the resources. It's just that they've already allocated those resources to goals. And so it's hard to make a change in the priority because you already went to the work to make the first priority. You know what I'm saying? So change is challenging. And so don't expect it not to be. And so you need to spell this out in your content, in your conversations. You need to have compassion for where people are on their journey and compassion for yourself that you've been on a really big journey of transformation already, most likely. If you're listening at this point in the video, I'm guessing that you have probably had some significant transformation that has caused you to really believe in your coaching and your method. But just remember, your journey, there was a time when you did not know that you could do what you have done. And so just have a lot of patience for coding things out and just saying it explicitly. Make sure you do not waste energy on convincing people who don't believe in coaching, don't believe in getting help, don't believe in the transformation, don't believe in the change. This is the single biggest waste of time and money that I see in most coaches in their businesses. They are so upset that their family members don't understand, that their friends don't understand, that their colleagues at their old workplace don't understand. This is just, I would say, one of those rites of passages that we go through as entrepreneurs. When you decide to become an entrepreneur and you decide to be an entrepreneur that helps people and you decide to help people through something like coaching, you're making many decisions that are putting you separate from the herd. Because most people don't do that. Most people do not pursue their own business, just period. Most people get a job. Right? Most people get a job and that's it. Like, that's their lifestyle. And then when you say, okay, well, I want to be a coach. Well, most entrepreneurs are not coaches, right? Most entrepreneurs are building other like conventional businesses, traditional businesses. So you're already kind of weird wanting to play that role with somebody. And then also you're probably a particular type of coach, which makes you different than all the other coaches. So like every step you're taking on your identity here, you are different. You are, with love, weird. And like all that weirdness, here's what happens is then you look back at the normal masses and you go, why don't you respect my weirdness? And it's like, that's not their job. That's not their job. It's your job. It's your job to respect yourself for the journey that you've been on. It's your job to communicate to others how you can help. It's not their job to understand you. It is your job to be somebody who communicates in a way that allows you to be understood. And I think what makes this so super challenging is you're going to get people who would prefer that you don't, right? And I think, kind of getting back to what we were talking about earlier with the unicorn, targeting this unicorn person, I think why that unicorn person happens is because you see the rejection from the masses. Like everybody knows about the rejection from the masses, but they then over identify in this perfect unicorn person who has all the amazing traits, is just a magical human being, and has this exact perfect emotional state that would make them just an absolute treat and a joy to work with. And the truth is that your ideal avatar is, like I said, somewhere in between that, right? So it's fine to have the ideals, but if you have those ideals to such an extent that you're not meeting anybody and you're not talking to anybody and you're not connecting with anybody because you're looking for imaginary people, like that's not going to feel good either. So the way you find this ideal avatar is, like I said, it's testing the messaging, it's testing the resonance of it. And it's also maybe working with a mentor, maybe working with somebody who could help you to navigate it. Now, thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Helping You to Find the Niche. This week, I would love for you to just write down 5 names of real people that you know. They could be friends, they could be followers, they could be former clients, and just ask them, like, what is the problem that they might consider a coach to solve? Not necessarily saying you, but like, what is something that they're working on in their life that they might consider hiring a coach over? Do they actually even want that help? Are they somebody who's more of a self-study kind of a person, somebody who's more of a figure it out myself kind of a person, and they have to warm up to the coaching? Have they ever paid for support before? These are fantastic questions that I asked in my first few months as a coach that gave me a lot of insight into the receptivity that people generally had around the kind of coaching that I generally wanted to do. So just pick one person out of the 5 people you've listed, reach out, just start there, have the conversation, start gathering some data. And if you're ready to stop guessing about where your next 5 clients are going to come from, make sure you head to next5clients.com. That's next number 5clients.com, because we've got a free community and a free group called Clients Over Chaos. When you join the community, you're immediately going to get access to my 5 video series. They're only 10 minutes each, these little videos, but they are so transformative for helping you to get out of that overwhelm, out of that feeling like I'm never going to figure it out, into the activation. Now, whether you're a coach who is just starting out and looking for your first few clients, or you're a coach who's had some great success with word of mouth and you're ready to systemize your client acquisition and you're ready to start really putting yourself out there on the social media and build your email list and do the digital marketing thing. Either way, I think you're going to really love the Clients Over Chaos community. And so you can go check that out at next5clients.com. And again, it's free, it's real, and you can ditch chasing unicorns. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode, and we will see you on another. And until then, do what matters.